Hello everyone and welcome to Pompolic Wars Call for Heroes, or Pompolic Call for Heroes depending on which region you live in. I'm currently recording this video using a rather terrible headset mic, and we're going to see how the headset mic quality holds up if I can use it as a replacement until I get the better microphone back. So anyway, we're still here to talk about the game. Pompolic Call for Heroes is a 3D hack-and-slash action RPG. And you may have seen a few games like this before, I certainly have, but this one has a couple of weird and maybe interesting things about it. For one, every action requires mana of some sort. Even swinging our basic weapon requires mana. If we run out of green mana, for example, down there in the lower left, we can no longer swing our axe. This may sound like a terribly limiting mechanic, and at first I thought so too. I understand limiting ranged attacks or magic attacks, but a basic melee swing with a weapon? I'm not so sure. Thankfully, anytime we pick up a key item, more enemies and items spawn, so there's usually plenty of green mana to go around. This raises another concern though. If there's always plenty of mana to go around, then why bother limiting it in the first place? But I digress. If we pick up a second hand axe, we gain an upgrade for our first one. So when we pick up this hand axe back here, we will gain the ability to throw it. And we have infinite throws until we run out of mana. This is our first projectile attack, and it's what we're going to be using for the entire rest of this video, because melee combat in this game is a losing battle. I say the entire rest of the video, but really it's only most of it. Still, it's our primary method of attack, and whenever I use something else, it's only to briefly demonstrate it. You might notice these little blue vials sitting around. Those refill our health instantaneously upon pickup. We can't store them in our inventory. And there are a few mechanics in this game that you're not going to see in this video because I find them to be completely superfluous, at least from what I've played. It's possible to cast spells such as put a spike barrier around us or increase our attack power, or shoot a ring of ice, but I find these completely unnecessary. And to make them even more useless, we can only cast them after we pick up the icon that we need to cast them. For example, we need to pick up an icon of cold in order to cast the Ring of Frost spell, or an icon of might to cast the Strength Enhancement spell. So spells in this game, which some would argue are a fairly important part of an action RPG, are just kinda not there. But I've played plenty of action RPGs where spells don't play a major role, so it doesn't bother me all that much. Still, it's a core game mechanic that isn't even necessary. Again, at least from what I've played. Just throwing the axe at everything seems to work great, as you've seen so far. Seems to reduce the combat to a non-issue. Just wrecking everything. That might be because the thrown axe auto-aims at the nearest enemy. Another mechanic that's somewhat unique to this game that you're not going to see is that if we pick up 50 coins that are lying around, we can enter God mode. And I don't know what God mode is, but I don't intend to use it because it's called God mode. And this game is already fairly easy. To be completely fair, it's only easy because we picked up the thrown axe really early. Depending on the order in which you pick up items, this game could be incredibly difficult, as I found out on my first time playing it. I didn't pick up the thrown axe until really late in my playthrough of this level, and it was incredibly frustrating fighting everything with melee combat. But it's not like a game like this has much middle ground. As far as difficulty is concerned, the combat is incredibly imprecise, and that seems to be intentional. It's very reminiscent of old 1990s action RPGs and early 2000 action RPGs in this way, with how inaccurate the combat is. But that means that any kind of serious challenge would be frustrating, and any kind of negation to the challenge would make the game easy. Not a lot of room for gray. I will say that although the game design is incredibly questionable, there's nothing about the game that doesn't seem to technically function. Everything about the game technically works. It's playable. I haven't seen any real glitches so far. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. You don't even know what our main goal is here. You've just seen me exploring this area with seemingly no rhyme or reason. Our goal in this game is to collect the Dark Souls in each map. This is one of them right here. I know they don't look like souls, they just look like spikes, but that's what the Dark Souls are. And after we collect all of them, the teleporter will open and take us to a new map. This means the pathfinding is just as important as the combat, because it's essentially a collectathon. Let's not call it what it isn't. You're running around a large open-ended map looking for small collectibles so that way you can progress to the next area. This is a collectathon action RPG, as painful as that may sound. This game does have something of a story to justify collecting these Dark Souls, but it's incredibly generic and only present in the game's instruction manual and on the developer's website, which is gone now. There's no cutscenes or anything in the game whatsoever. Anyway, now that we've got the basics of the game out of the way, I can start talking about the game in a meta sense, which is usually my favorite thing about these videos. You may recall near the beginning of the video that I said I've seen a lot of games like this before. The games I were thinking of specifically were Warriors of Might and Magic, its sequel Shifters, and Enclave. Warriors of Might and Magic and Shifters are PC action RPGs that were mistakenly only released for the PS2. I'm sure it's a mistake that was made a lot. Anyway, you could have told me this game was a direct spiritual successor to Warriors of Might and Magic and Shifters, and I would have believed you, because the design sensibilities and genre just seem so unmistakably similar. The same awkward, imprecise combat, the same short jump, the same approach to basic game design. It's all here. This is basically another Warriors of Might and Magic. Now, I'm not sure if I could call Pom-Palic Wars better or worse than Warriors of Might and Magic, but it's certainly a little easier to play. Maybe not for the better. I recall being far more impressed with Warriors of Might and Magic's design and pathfinding than Pom-Palic Wars, but it's been a while since I've played it. Though when I did play it, I played it a lot. There also weren't individual maps in Warriors of Might and Magic, but the game design was, and general aesthetic were very similar. Enclave, on the other hand, is probably the best example of what I think Pom-Palic Wars and Warriors of Might and Magic were trying to do. It's available for the Xbox and on PC on Steam. And it's a lot like this, but better. But just like Warriors of Might and Magic and Pom-Palic Wars, it has a very old heart to it. 3D action RPGs have moved up in the world. Since Warriors of Might and Magic and Enclave came out, you know, you have Arcania now, you have Risen, you have the ever-so-terrible Magus. Design has changed as far as 3D action RPGs are concerned. And this kind of combat and awkward pathfinding just doesn't fit anymore. What makes this even more awkward for Pom-Palic Wars is that Pom-Palic Wars came out in 2007. You might not have been able to tell by looking at the video, but no, this game didn't come out in the late 90s or early 2000s. This game came out in 2007, in spite of how old and dated it seems. That being said, I've always personally found a charm in games like this. I absolutely loved Warriors of Might and Magic, Shifters, and Enclave, and this is basically just more of that. Granted, it's somewhat less, interesting than those games. But a lot of the things I liked about those games are here. That doesn't make the game good by any stretch of the imagination, please don't get me wrong. I wouldn't recommend this game to anyone under any circumstance. Especially since the pathfinding, which is generally the thing I enjoy most about these games, is a little messy. Oh wait, I just remembered another great example of a game like this, Draconis Cult of the Worm on the Dreamcast. Very similar to this style of game. Combat is a lot more precise, and they seem to put a lot more effort into how the combat flows in general. But yeah, that's another 3D action RPG with very similar design sensibilities to this one. And Warriors of Might and Magic and Enclave. Anyway, when I said the pathfinding was messy, you may notice that some gates that were closed before are just kind of randomly opening, seemingly for no reason. Instead of the gates opening when you press a switch or defeat a certain enemy or anything like that, the gates open when you collect certain items. At first I thought the gates open dependent on how many Dark Souls you collect, but it's not always the Dark Souls, just items in general. Also, here's a weapon we picked up before that I didn't use, because it's basically just a worse throwing axe. Sure, it deals more damage and has a wider area of effect, but it takes so much longer, and that cloud can hurt us as well. Anyway, yeah, how you open gates in this game is just by picking up random items with no indication of what they might do in the environment. Now it's time for a bit of history on Pumpolic Wars itself. It was developed by, as far as I can tell, 2 people. And that might show, though for 2 people the graphics aren't all that bad, in spite of them looking rather dated. And they were very proud of the game. Their website went through several phases of design. None of the website designs looked bad. They tried to get a pulse on the gaming community, had a forum ready. It's just that nobody actually wanted to play this, so their enthusiasm was all but wasted. There's that same kind of amateurish charm to the game that I really seem to like about games like this. Though unlike Cursed Crusade, there's nothing outstanding about the gameplay or narrative for me to actually recommend to people. And you shouldn't play it just because the people who really wanted to make the game are kinda cute. You can just listen to me talk about how they're kinda cute. One of my favorite moments while looking through their website and dev diary was reading about how they hired a British film composer to make the music for this game. And the guy clearly didn't play a lot of video games, because the reason he wanted to compose for the game is because he believed that action mechanics and RPG mechanics had never been mixed together like this before. He felt like this was something unique, and apparently had never heard of action RPGs before in his life, even once. And I do think it's rather humorous and kind of terrible that the people developing the game didn't correct him, because I refuse to believe that they didn't know action RPGs existed. Anyway, in spite of them being incredibly proud of the game and trying to do everything right, you know, having a forum, having lots of pre-release material, having very expansive demos. By expansive, I mean they had an entire level in them. Nothing worked out for them in the end, and this game sold terribly, got terrible reviews, and nobody wanted anything to do with it. Except for Data Design Interactive. Yeah, you know those shovelware peddling crooks? They saw Pumpolic Wars and decided they wanted to port it to the Nintendo Wii. And apparently the people behind Pumpolic Wars didn't understand Data Design Interactive's reputation, or something, because they agreed. And this game has so much more effort put into it than anything Data Design Interactive has ever published. So that was kind of sad to hear about, that they let Data Design Interactive port this to the Wii with motion controls. And I would love to talk more about the Wii version, but I can't actually tell whether the port went through or not. There's some information suggesting it did, such as box art floating around on the internet. And there's someone on the Dolphin Wiki who claims to have tested it with Dolphin. But I can't find any empirical evidence that the game actually exists. There's no physical shots of the case anywhere or the disc, and there's no gameplay anywhere on the internet of the Wii version. And GameFAQs seems to think it was cancelled, so maybe it was, but it's all rather confusing. Regardless, this game is certainly subpar and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it's not nearly as terrible as the reviews made it out to be. As hard as that may be to swallow, everything about the game technically functions like I said. It's not a broken game, it's just very poorly designed. So we have a new weapon, the last weapon of the level, and we can use it to kill enemies in a single hit. And I guess that's neat, but we have to get real close to do it, so I would honestly prefer to use the throwing axe, but this is the final confrontation, so we might as well use this weapon. So are you ready to hear the big twist of this video? This was actually the demo version of Pumpolic Wars all along. This is only the demo. And it's a really good demo, honestly. I can't help it that the game isn't good, but this is a fairly robust demo that gives you a good impression of what the game might be like. Like I said, they did a lot of stuff right, it's just the game itself way too outdated and has way too many questionable design choices for the average consumer to even consider buying it, and even consumers that are into old style games like this probably still wouldn't enjoy it. Alright, the video's over.